Welcome to Economic Trends, your source for the latest news and analysis on global economics and business. Are you feeling the pinch of soaring rent prices? With mortgage rates at historic highs, many would-be homebuyers are being forced out of the housing market, driving up demand for rentals. In fact, according to Realtor.com, as of January 27th, less than 6% of rental units were sitting vacant in the U.S. rental market. Despite recent declines seen around the country ranging from 2 to 6%, rent prices are still at historic highs, with expensive rental costs burdening 44 million Americans from all over the nation. For the bottom 10% of income earners, rents are unaffordable in virtually every state in the country. Meanwhile, eviction rates are rising fast, and this time around, there are no policies in place to prevent an eviction tsunami. Advocates warn that the rent crisis is threatening to spark a national catastrophe. Today, we will analyze some incredibly shocking statistics about rental affordability in the U.S. that everyone should know. While rent prices are breaking records, wage growth is currently flat. According to the latest numbers released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, weekly earnings for both men and women in the middle class were standing at $1,085 per week as of January 15th, before taxes. That's about $4,340 of income per month, which means that middle-class households bringing in that amount would pay more than 41% of their income on rent. Official housing agencies say that anyone spending more than 30% of their income on rent is considered cost-burdened. That means those workers may struggle to afford necessities, such as food and transportation. This also means that low-income workers are in extreme financial distress due to rent price increases, given that they need to spend about 55% of their income to pay for a one-bedroom rental currently listed on the market. According to estimates from the National Housing Coalition, in January, the average monthly rent affordable to a family of four with a household income at the poverty line was $694. In contrast, the average fair market rent for a one-bedroom rental home was $1,492 per month during that same period. For the bottom 10%, rent prices are out of their reach in virtually all of the states in the country. New research released by Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies, JCHS, and Moody's Analytics has actually found that for the first time in more than 2 decades, every state now has low and middle income renters who are nearing a financial breaking point as a result of low rent affordability. Almost half of Americans now struggle with a growing percentage of their incomes going towards keeping a roof over their heads. Rising mortgage rates cause many households to be priced out of home buying, forcing would-be buyers to remain renters. Apartment demand surged as a result, and true freight sky-high as the disparity between rent growth and income growth widens. Americans feel financially squeezed as wage growth trails rent growth, researchers at Moody's wrote in the report. Harvard's JCHS went a step further by factoring race and poverty into the analysis. Renters living in communities of color and in high poverty and lower income were more likely to experience severe financial problems. In fact, more than 3/5 of renters behind on housing payments lived in communities of color, while about 2/5 lived in high poverty or lower income neighborhoods. The group concluded that no states have an adequate supply of housing for low-income individuals. This is an alarming fact, especially in light of the uptick in the homeless population, which has grown by 32% since 2015. For renters whose income is at or below the poverty level, there's a shortage of affordable rental homes to the tune of 7 million, JCHS found. While new multifamily construction is gaining momentum, most new construction is geared toward middle and upper income households. Researchers say that the National Housing Coalition highlights that people need to earn $24.90 per hour to afford a rental home without spending more than 30% of their income, which is considered a general guideline for a healthy personal budget. But almost 1/3 or 32% of the American workforce earns less than $15 per hour. These workers are in a harrowing position of barely having enough income to cover rent, transportation to work, and food and utility costs. Although the Census Bureau finds that the average middle-class income in 2022 was $70,000, that same figure for low-income earners was only $26,247. This $44,000 income difference reflects the depth of the rental crisis the nation is facing. On average, according to the St. Louis Fed, low-income families own about 21 cents per dollar of middle-class family wealth. These substantial wealth disparities pose a significant obstacle for low-income families to find affordable housing and break the cycle of poverty. Despite its good intentions, the recently released guidelines lack the power to enforce implementation. Additionally, the agency plans to require certain rental property owners to provide 30 days' notice if they plan to terminate a tenant's lease due to non-payment of rent. While evictions may seem like a straightforward issue, the reality is much more complex. Unlawful evictions and landlords using eviction filings to intimidate tenants exacerbate an already perilous rental market. Eviction filings have already returned to pre-pandemic levels, with some areas even exceeding them due to inflation and skyrocketing rent prices, pushing many renters deeper into financial hardship. Last month, around 15% of tenants were behind on rent, a persistently high number, according to Sophia Wooden, a research analyst at JCHS. Wooden and her team also discovered evidence of rampant abusive eviction practices by 4 corporate landlords: Cratium, Invitation Homes, Ventron, and the Siegel Group. One of their illegal tactics was not adhering to the eviction moratorium rules or the federal rental assistance programs during the pandemic. The 4 companies filed a total of 14,744 eviction actions between March 15, 2020 and July 29, 2021. At the same time, each company displayed evidence of financial stability, with Invitation Homes reporting record profits and investing in significant expansions. Siegel experienced almost no revenue decline, and both Ventron and Siegel each received more than $2 million in forgiven Paycheck Protection Program funds, according to the report. Conditions are dire even for renters who want to move elsewhere, as new leases are costing almost twice as much as renewals. Realtor.com reports that new leases are an additional $300 or more per month, compared to $160 per month for renewing an existing lease. Prohibitively expensive rent hikes can trap renters in inadequate apartments or force them to forego being closer to work or school because it's too expensive to relocate, explains George Radio, the company's senior economist and manager of economic research. Many renters find themselves in a financially precarious situation when their leases reach that month-to-month status, but landlords are renewing these leases at much higher rates or adding fees, says Hal Martin, a policy economist for the Program on Economic Inclusion at the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. Hal Martin analyzed eviction data before and after the pandemic and found that one of the most notable results from the analysis was the link between the rise in evictions and the rise in rent prices. In cities where there was a 1% rent increase over the previous 3 months, there was a 2% increase in the eviction rate. There's a clear acceleration in evictions in places with higher rent growth, Margin says. It could be that if you have a tenant struggling to pay rent, the payoff to evict increases if you can raise the rent for the next tenant. While landlords have a right to maximize their rent profits, particularly in the face of rising inflation, renters are left with increasingly fewer options as affordable housing remains in short supply. Landlords, for their part, have been left to bear the burden of providing housing for financially vulnerable renters. At this point, the national rental vacancy rate is hovering around 5.6%, the lowest since the mid-1980s, exacerbating an imbalance of supply and demand that's fueling runaway rent price hikes. A study by Rent Cafe revealed that in the fourth quarter, there were an average of 14 renters competing for one apartment. While illegal evictions make the housing insecurity and homelessness crisis worse, the real culprit is the combination of an undersupply of affordable housing, poor wage growth, and a persistent lack of federal and state assistance to help both landlords and low-income tenants. For the past 40 years, U.S. workers have faced stagnant wages and loss of buying power, yet the cost of rent has steadily climbed during that time, with sharp increases of 14 to 40% over the past 2 years alone. In the face of such an oblique scenario, the prophetic voice of Dr. King remains as timely as it is timeless. Do you know that most of the poor people in our country are working every day? They are making wages so low that they cannot begin to function in the mainstream of the economic life of our nation. These are facts which must be seen, and it is outrageous to have people working on a full-time basis and a full-time job getting part-time income, he said back in 1968. And it's safe to say that from that era until this very day, things have only gotten worse. Now, the rental affordability crisis and the growing threat of evictions in America paint a dire picture for millions of renters, putting them at risk of financial instability and losing their homes, and also further exacerbating an already dire situation. The consequences for the nation's most vulnerable citizens will be devastating, with overwhelming impacts that will be felt for years to come. This is a humanitarian crisis that demands immediate attention, and it is up to all of us to work together to find solutions and ensure that everyone has access to safe, affordable housing. Don't forget to subscribe and enable notifications so you can be the first to know about future videos.